Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 11, Day 3. Today's journal, I'd like for you to talk about why did Truman call for a more powerful bomb in the late 1940s? What was the new weapon and how powerful was it? Remember, we did the nuke map, and we've been talking about the nuclear bomb. Okay? Today we're going to be talking about the Korean War. All right, continuing our unit on 1950 society and culture. Today's essential questions: how were the effects of the Cold War felt in America during the 1950s and 60s? How did America attempt to prepare citizens for the threat of nuclear war? How did each American president deal differently with these threats? And then what was the Red Scare and its implications? Same essential questions we've been talking about, but we just want to continue trying to answer those. In the Korean War, if you remember, in World War II, we got very involved in the area around Korea and Japan, obviously with China being an ally through World War II. When we got involved in the Pacific theater, we also realized we didn't want communism to spread after the war. So, after World War II, American and Soviet forces both were trying to disarm Japanese troops stationed in Korea. What ensued was basically the communists occupying North Korea and America occupying South Korea. And they divided at the 38th parallel, which is still the line today that divides North and South Korea. Communist government was organized in the north, and the American government backed the new government in South Korea. On June 25th of 1950, North Korean troops invaded the south, driving back the poorly equipped troops. Now, it's important to note that North Korea was very successful with the backing of the Soviets at one point in the war, as well as the Americans were successful in helping support the South Korean army and pushing back. The problem was they couldn't go far enough each way to kind of one's take over and one not. So Truman ordered MacArthur to send troops from Japan to the Korean Peninsula, and U.S. and NATO forces defended the South. Chinese troops backed the North. Gets back to my point. Basically, the U.S. pushed the North Koreans to the Chinese border before they were ordered to halt their advance by the Chinese. Now, that is kind of what I'm getting at, is even though the United States forces that were there helped fight in Korea and push the Chinese back and their support for the North Koreans, now you have an issue here of you can't really go any further without starting a bigger war. Like the United States would have had to invade China, and that's not what they were trying to do, or at least that's not what they wanted to do. Now, the orders were ignored. China launched a massive attack across the Yalu River, and the forces were then driven back again to the 38th parallel. It comes back to the same thing I'm telling you, that every time we tried to fight and advance further, China would fight back and push us, or push the United States back to the 38th parallel or a little further, and so on. MacArthur demanded Truman to expand the war against China, blockades of Chinese ports, the use of nationalist forces, and atomic weapons. MacArthur wanted it all. He wanted Truman to come in and level Korea like we had Japan, and Truman was just not going to do that. Okay, he did not want to go to war with China, and he did not want to use the atomic bomb. So MacArthur, being one of the head leaders of the American military, is going to begin getting support towards a new president. Okay, many people were upset at Truman, or at least that's how MacArthur thought it was, that he was not dropping the bomb and he wouldn't push further. Now, MacArthur is fired for insubordination after he publicly criticizes the president, and you can imagine why. By mid-1951, the UN forces pushed the Chinese and North Korean forces back across the 38th parallel. So the newly formed United Nations is doing what it's supposed to. It's a peacekeeping organization, and it's helping to, one, at least keep communism from spreading across the whole country of Korea. An armistice would not be signed until July of 1953, after more than 33,600 Americans had died in Korea. So it was a long war, but it's also one of the forgotten wars because it wasn't on a world stage, and it's much like Vietnam. It was dealing in one specific area, and it was way away from America, and so a lot of times Americans forget about the Korean War. Here you can see the Korean War memorials, okay, and these are in Washington, D.C. All right, and finally, we're going to come to one of the last things we're going to talk about today, which is the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. A Republican-led Congress called for a weakening of unions. All right, they're trying to weaken the power of unions that had formed after World War II. This was a part of the New Deal and Wagner Act. The law outlawed secondary boycotts and required union officials to sign loyalty oaths, which gave the president power to lay off strikers he deemed dangerous to public safety or health. All right, so this is once again getting back to um, trying to promote the nation and keep from companies uh, destroying the war effort or trying to hurt an industry that is important to the war effort. The effect of the act, though, is it weakened unions. Specifically, it also prompted business to move industries from the Northeast to the Sun Belt or the southern areas because, um, you know, unions were kind of the reason that, the northern part of the United States was so, or that's where unions were kind of concentrated. And so for businesses, it made sense to get out of the North. It drove out communist and leftist union leaders, which is one of the reasons that the Taft-Hartley Act was also passed during this time, is they thought it was a communist-driven. And Truman vetoed the bill, but unfortunately, Congress overrode it. So even though Truman realized that this act was going directly against unions and going to weaken unions, there was nothing he could do because Congress overrode it. Now, those are the two big things we talked about today, the 38th parallel in Korea and the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. So make sure you keep up with your vocabulary, and if you have any problems, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you soon.